Well, everybody, we are having the wrong conversations about Florida State and Clemson. There is a lot of conversation going on about Florida State and Clemson and just SEC expansion or lack thereof in general right now. But I'm telling you, we're still having some of the wrong combos. And some of it is just sheer brilliance, honestly, from Greg Sankey in being a master manipulator and using a terrific distraction tactic. So I want to get into that today. Hopefully, we'll be able to play the audio for you. We'll see how it goes, barring technology here. But either way, we're going to dissect the latest move that Greg Sankey has deployed in order to strategically, basically, deflect any conversation about Florida State or Clemson. Plus, as you can see from the headline of the video, we have more evidence out there now that North Carolina, especially North Carolina, Virginia to a lesser extent, but especially North Carolina is the real prize out there for the SEC in expansion. I think everybody kind of knows that, but this is one of the first times that I've really seen a reporter and a pretty well-respected reporter speak to that, being that it is Chris Lowe of ESPN who did. Now, in relationship with this opening talking point that I have about the SEC and people having the wrong conversations about that and Florida State and Clemson, I'm not sure how exactly you want to take that and frame Chris Lowe saying this like, hey, they actually really would want North Carolina and Virginia. Well, what does that mean for Florida State and Clemson? Would they take them all as one? Million ways that we could go with that. But I think for right now, what is very clear is that Greg Sankey is using a lot of deflection tactics to keep any discussion, any serious discussion about Florida State or Clemson pretty far down the road, which is an intelligent move of him, no matter what his ultimate end goal is there for them now. So we'll make sure that we're having the right conversations here on the show. I'm not saying that Florida State and Clemson will be in the SEC. I'm not saying they won't be. I'm just trying to give you kind of the current state of the landscape here and a look inside at what appears to be going on by people involved, a la Greg Sankey here. We did get an update as well from Ross Dellinger on what is happening with lost this for 1 second. Update from Ross Dellinger on what is happening with revenue sharing right now. So obviously that is a big thing. And we have the SEC telling us what they are expecting to pay, what the SEC is expecting to pay eventually for revenue sharing to football athletes. We know what it is going to be overall, right? It's that $20 to $22 million number. But what they're going to pay to football specifically is pretty revealing, honestly. And it's pretty revealing about what they think about the potential Title IX implications of this, which will have a lot of significance for everybody involved here, Big 12 schools included. They also talked a bit about collectives, which is the real kicker on this as to whether or not the $20 to $22 million revenue sharing number is going to work as a salary cap or if it is not. That really is the question. I think most expect that it is not, and the SEC seems to fall in line on that. So we will get to that. I've got some good and bad with Nick Saban. I'm not sure how you guys feel about Nick Saban, former head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Apologies. Actually, I should really be announcing him these days as ESPN analyst Nick Saban. ESPN analyst Nick Saban had some thoughts. He was whining about the Big 12. But at the same time, he came back around and had a take that I think Big 12 fans will like. So we've got some good and some bad. Some good and some bad on good old Nick Saban. And I have thoughts on the Big 12 conference race. Shirhan Jayaraja, who you've seen on the channel here before from CBS Sports, I think one of the best college football voices out there right now. He was getting hounded by an Oklahoma State fan who was very offended that Oklahoma State was picked fifth by Shirhan. And I thought he did a great job talking him off the ledge a bit about the realities of this Big 12 race. So if we have time, we can certainly get into that. If we don't, you will read about it in the next Open for Business newsletter that I'm currently working on right now. And if you are a fan of the channel, a fan of my work, especially if you're a hardcore Big 12 fan, make sure that you are signed up for Open for Business. You can sign up by clicking the link in the description, first link that you'll see in the description of the video, or you can just go to ofbnews.com. ofbnews.com is how you can get signed up for the Open for Business newsletter. For Big 12 fans, it is a must. You can get your college football news through a Big 12 lens instead of an SEC or Big 10 lens and get it straight to your inbox. So if you want to support the channel, that is the easiest way to do so. Of course, you can also do so by submitting a super chat to the chat tonight. You do that by clicking the $ below the chat box. It will attach a donation to your chat, pin it in a separate column for me. That's the way to guarantee that you make it on the show tonight. But obviously, keep commenting in the chat no matter what. I will certainly get to what I can. And if you would like the video, that's another totally free way to support the channel. I would love that. If you comment underneath the video after the video is done, if you are not watching this live, leave me a comment underneath. All that stuff really does help. And you can also contribute to the channel on Venmo. It is John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you want to contribute there and leave a question or comment there, I will kick off the next show with your question or comment, which is what is happening today with good old Eric Yeater. Appreciate you, Eric. Thank you for your contribution. Appreciate you. So Eric submits to John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. People attacking insiders reporting Florida State and Clemson possibly to the Big 12 are realignment rookies. They paid attention to headlines and highlights until their team was affected. They're just upset and clueless. Going after Pflugar, Kurtz, and even Dellinger is clueless. Eric, it's a very astute observation. I appreciate it, and I think you are generally right. And that's why, I mean, easier said than done, but a lot of times you really just have to take this stuff and let it roll off you and don't take it personally, because that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's what we saw last year with the Pac-12 and their fans. We know how that whole thing went. Any Pac-12 fan, particularly those of the schools that were going to be affected, and this is not to single out Utah fans at all. It's not even to single out Washington State, Oregon State fans. A lot of the fans that knew they could be affected if that league were to blow up started to get really, really defensive, angry, and upset as soon as people started to say, hey, this actually doesn't look really good for the for the media rights deal that the Pac-12 is trying to come up with. Like this seems like they may be in some real trouble. It was really, I think, the inflection point there was when like the John Orans and Andrew Marchands of the world, who report on the media side of this, they get the media scoop, and they were coming out and saying, yeah, this doesn't look good. I don't know exactly what the Pac-12 is doing or hoping for here. When that started coming out, then it was like people really started to attack anyone who was legitimizing those reports or using those reports. And you saw people whose teams were going to be affected getting very upset, digging in and using anything and everything they could to throw it back at you and call you names, say that you're dumb. How could this ever happen? This until we know what happened. At the end of the day, the Pac-12 exploded. It is no longer. We know how it all worked out. It feels very, very similar here, Eric. And so it would be not only, in this case, the next version of the Pac-12 fans from last year, which are, of course, now the ACC fans. Particularly, it seems like there's been a lot of SMU, which makes sense. They finally get to a Power 5 league, right? They're going to fight like hell and say, no, it can't be that we just got here and this thing's going to crumble. So it stands to reason that SMU would be fighting this about the hardest of anybody. Cal, I've seen a little bit of Cal, although I don't think they have a sincerely strong Twitter presence with their fan base. But even those, like if you're in like the Wake Forest, Boston College sort of tier of the ACC, like I understand why you would be fighting back and pushing back on this. But really, Eric, I think, and you're hitting on this, the ones that are really, really fighting a lot and throwing a lot of shade and throwing a lot of mud, those are Florida State fans. Florida State fans are the ones really upset because they don't want to believe that their school would ever have to stoop as low as the Big 12, right? This has all been very brash of them, and they are extremely confident that they are one of the best brands in college football, and they are going to get into the Big 10 or the SEC. I don't think it's a slam dunk. I think they certainly still very much have a shot. I would still say it would be more likely to me that they wind up in the SEC or Big 10 than they do the Big 12, but I am very much open to the Big 12 being a possibility. You guys know that's where I stand if you've been watching the channel here lately. But Florida State fans who, yes, probably have just been kind of, over the last year with the Big 12, Pac-12 stuff, more just looking passively, reading headlines, not involved in the day-to-day of this and how it typically winds up going, those types of fans are going to be very upset right now. Like, how dare this? We are mighty Florida State. We're not the lowlifes of the Pac-12 or the Big 12 who were involved in this for the past year, the past couple of years. Meanwhile, Big 12 fans, or even Greg Pflugar, myself, people who have been paying attention to this like day after day for going on 3+ years now. It's like, to us, like, we kind of see the writing on the wall and how this stuff works and how this can be possible, and just give you the idea of what could happen here and give you the outline of what could happen here. We don't have the emotional attachment that a Florida State fan might in reacting and getting upset. So I think you're right, Eric. And that's why, like, I mean, I'm trying, at least if it's people in that corner of the internet coming after me. I haven't gotten a ton of it, not as much as others. But if I do, you try and just let that roll off your back a little bit more than you probably should be doing that all the time, right? That's probably a message I should preach to myself all the time, anytime you get any pushback or hate. But especially here, like, look, man, they're emotionally reactionary fans. They are fans of their school. They don't like where this might be going. Me personally, as a K-State grad, I very much understand the position that they are in. So, hey, I get it. I understand where they are coming from. So appreciate you, Eric. Thank you for your contribution. If you want to be like Eric, it is John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo, if you would like to do that. Very, very easy way to do that. Okay, Mark, I am so glad. First of all, thank you so much for your support. I am so glad that you sent me this message. I was literally just thinking as I was popping on today. I've had it on my list now for a couple of days. I was at the lake most of the weekend, so I didn't have time to get to it, but I owe you an email. I saw your email. Really appreciated it. And I am going to get you a response. So didn't want you to think that I was leaving you hanging. I appreciate that email, and I wanted to make sure I give you a long, thoughtful response. So you will get one. But Mark says, aside from your live shows, if we want to ask a question whilst donating, Venmo, attempted with another creator, no response. Ouch. Live and learn. Yeah, see, I try to make damn sure anytime I see the email come through from Venmo, I try to make damn sure that I've got that starred so that I know that I'm coming back to it to kick off a show, because I do not want to leave you hanging like that. Have you considered YouTube memberships, Patreon? I'm a Utah fan. Utah? Okay, Utah. Like, yeah. Okay, from Utah. Gotcha. Living in Florida, you've replaced Monty as my go-to. Well, hey, thank you very much, Mark, for the kind words and for your contributions and for being here and for asking how you can support. So I was going to email you this, but I'll just have some of the conversation here. I do have something in the works on that, because I know that there is a portion, at least, of the audience that would be likely to pay for some extra content. I have that coming. It may not be directly through YouTube memberships. The only reason that I have not gone down that road yet is because I have had something else in the works with that. So for now, if you want more content, definitely get signed up at ofbnews.com for the Open for Business newsletter, and stay tuned there and stay tuned here on the channel. I will get you updates on where you could pay just a little bit a month to get access to more content. So rest assured that is going to come at some point. It's all a matter in how I package it. So that's it. And I'm glad you asked. And I know others have asked me about that too. So there's a bit of an explanation. For a while, I didn't do it because I was like, I feel like the live shows do well and people are contributing some here. And I was worried, if I open up the memberships, will people contribute less during the live shows? Would it come out to be about the same? And frankly, as you guys have seen in the past on the channel, I have been too hesitant to change at points. Like, just too, hey, this has been working, I don't want to screw it up. I'm much, much more. I've turned over a complete new leaf on that. I'm definitely willing to try things and do things. So it's not a matter of me just being stuck in my old ways here, but it's me trying to figure out the most ideal way to package all of that together for you and for me. So it is being worked on. It is coming. And Mark, as I said, I really appreciate your support. I really appreciate the email. I will get you an individualized response there, because as John says here, with that level of contribution, Mark should get his own private line. Well, he basically does, but Mark has his own private line in large part because Mark signed up for Open for Business, ofbnews.com, and was able to figure it out that way. So that should be some motivation for everybody. Open for Business, ofbnews.com for the Big 12 newsletter. Mark, thank you so much. I will talk to you much more very shortly. But yes, for in the short term, Mark, yes, I would say Venmo, John-Kurtz-4. Venmo, John-Kurtz-4 is the easy way to do that. In the meantime, if you are so inclined to support me even more, which I blown away by the support and genuinely appreciate that so much. So thank you, Mark. We will talk soon, my friend. We will talk soon. Okay. With that, let's dive into my notes for today. The first report here is courtesy of Chris Lowe, and maybe this blurs the line on report a bit, but Chris Lowe is a guy who's based in the South, definitely knows the landscape of the SEC and what's going on there very, very well. He was on the Paul Feinbaum show, so he dropped knowledge / educated / informed opinion here on what's going on in the SEC, and everybody has been having these conversations about Florida State and Clemson lately, and they've been getting publicly mushed, like publicly shoved aside by the SEC and Big Ten, particularly the SEC, and then I guess publicly courted by the Big 12, more or less, through some reporters and, Brett McMurphy, Ross Dellinger, those sorts of avenues here. So there's a lot of chatter about it. But the real prize, apparently, for the SEC remains North Carolina and perhaps Virginia, according to Chris Lowe. Here's what he said, quote, "I think there's a better chance you would see more of an appetite for North Carolina and Virginia in the SEC. Not go after two of the league's big football brands. There's more to it than football," Lowe suggests. So, yes, this is not about the football brand of Florida State or Clemson. Nobody would argue the football brand of Florida State or Clemson is much healthier, much more powerful, much bigger than what you have with North Carolina and Virginia potentially going to your conference. The SEC's got a lot of football brands. This kind of ties into when we had the conversation about Kansas, and there have been whispers about, would Kansas be a fringe candidate there for the SEC? And that discussion was all about, well, you've kind of got the football thing maxed out now with Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, how many more football brands could you possibly pack in there? And you need teams to lose some games because then you won't be keeping everybody happy. Some of those brands will lose some value. Like at a certain point, you do need some teams to go in there and lose games. So if you can get nothing against Lance Leipold, I think they could be competitive. But the idea with Kansas was, that's not a football program that I think a lot of people would say is like totally SEC ready right now, at least competing at the top of the SEC ready. So you bring that in, plus you add to your basketball product. You start chipping away at other things. You almost maximize the value of what you can do with football, start maximizing the value of your basketball. And then here, Chris Lowe says, I'm going to read you his quote in just a moment, but the idea with like North Carolina and Virginia would be, well, obviously North Carolina is going to bring some basketball. Virginia, not that long ago that they won a national title. They're going to bring some basketball, even if it's faded a little bit. But you're also getting contiguous states, and you're getting big flagship institutions in those states, highly populated states that are also located in the geographic footprint of the SEC. And the SEC is the one conference in America where that still means something, and that still matters. So that's the general pitch there for North Carolina and Virginia. And so what Chris Lowe said is, quote, "There's other factors at play here. New footprints. You get the state of North Carolina, the state of Virginia, both academically elite schools. You have the basketball factor. You get a little bit of the Charlotte TV market, maybe a little bit of the DC markets, which is nice. But I would say at this point, that's secondary to what you're really concerned with and what you really want out of this. Much, much more about brand value and adding value, dollar signs wherever you can, but not going to hurt to have some more major TV markets in there. The academically elite schools part of it, I had to almost chuckle at a little bit too. I really don't think that matters all that much anymore to anybody, especially like if we're talking about the SEC being the one that it matters to. Probably not quite as much, but it's a bonus. It's a bonus. There's some sprinkles on top, right? So anyway, Chris Lowe, I would say, just gave voice in a more public manner on a very public platform that is talking straight to SEC fans and giving the perspective of the SEC. He gave a direct link to what a lot of us have been saying and speculating about for a long time, which is that, hey, as much as Florida State and Clemson are out there and being talked about, and that's what everybody wants to talk about, and obviously those fan bases want to talk about that, if the SEC were choosing today and it were just like a hierarchy, or, you're on the playground, it's Red Rover, Foursquare, whatever, you're picking teams, Notre Dame would be pick number one for like anybody. I think we understand that. But the SEC, after that, it's going to be North Carolina. Be looking at North Carolina and maybe Virginia. Virginia, I guess, is the one where like I would love to see what it would look like if push came to shove and those teams are all out there. The ACC is imploded. They're all out there, and you really get a chance to add them. Would the SEC like truly go take Virginia before they would take a Florida State or Clemson? We shall see. We shall see. But interesting nonetheless from Chris Lowe there. David, what's up, David? Appreciate you, David. David says, I agree. Buy wins for your football powers with basketball powers. Yeah, it's kind of like a win-win scenario there. Because it's not, would diminishing returns be totally appropriate for, could possibly be a situation where it'd be adding more football powers right now would get you somewhat diminishing returns based on what it would do to the overall health of the league. There's a pro rata clause in the SEC contract, which I think is important. And I do want to talk about that later on in the show. So you would be adding more money total, and it's not like the pie would be split any differently if and when you were to add somebody. But I think the basketball power football that's going to be respectable, right? And both North Carolina and Kansas fall into that category for sure right now. Respectable football, great basketball. That's probably the dynamic that the SEC would really, really like to see at this point in time, and probably why they can afford to be so flippant publicly right now about Florida State and Clemson. So I'm with you, David. I am with you. Oh, I see Village Idiot says July 21st, no bombshell. The latest date that I have seen thrown around a little bit is within the next week. So I guess we'll reconvene here next Sunday and see if anything happens within the next week. And I'm not really like big inside info guy, but I think if you've just been paying attention a little bit, you can kind of see some of that chatter that's out there. That's in regards to the ACC. Yeah, I'm definitely believe it when I see it mode. Okay, I'm definitely believe it when I see it mode. But there are those who are much more informed than me that have kind of been speculating a bit about whether or not something could happen within the next week. There's also, of course, August 15th, the date that they would need to notify the ACC by if they don't want to have to wait another calendar year to get out of the conference. So we still have that on the horizon, certainly for the ACC and Florida State and Clemson. Our web says, well, a dying model. Remember, John, Virginia got SEC network carriage fees in Virginia. Okay, yeah. Look, our web, you're always great at pointing out things like this that go beyond just the surface level, right? You are in the weeds as much as possible, and I mean that with the utmost respect with this. So it's a good note to add, and it probably does factor in a bit here. That probably does have some bearing on it. I would still keep my same statement that, like, again, push came to shove. If it's really like, dude, you can have Florida State or you can have Virginia, what would you really do? I would still be very curious to see how that boils down, but you're doing a good job supplementing the case, obviously, for Virginia. And for those who would look at it and be like Virginia, like what was the last time Virginia football did anything that I cared about? Like, why would the SEC care about them at all? It's things like this that can help start to paint that picture as to like why there would be legitimate interest there from the SEC. So appreciate you, R-Web. Thank you for your support of the channel as always. So on the Florida State and Clemson conversation right now, I do feel like a piece of this, because of Greg Sankey, has turned into everybody having the wrong sort of discussion. Greg Sankey continues to either directly or indirectly take shots at Florida State, or just kind of put them in their place. Maybe that's really the better way to frame it. The way that Sankey has handled this publicly, it's been keeping the SEC anointed up on a pedestal and putting Florida State in its place. Like, look, we don't need you. We don't need you. And whatever you think the end goal or the actual motivation is for Greg Sankey, that is absolutely the way that this has come across. Now, he made some comments on Next Round Live. Okay, Next Round Live YouTube show that airs for 3 hours every day, 9 a.m. to noon. So shout out to those guys for getting Greg Sankey here. The quote that has drawn a lot of attention is that Greg Sankey said, quote, "We're not going to take our pie and slice it into more pieces." That was him talking about Florida State. We're not going to take our pie and slice it into more pieces. And so everybody took that and ran with it and started saying, well, man, they're not going to take Florida State and Clemson because is there enough money to actually make everybody whole? And if that's not going to happen, they're not going to add anybody. And this is kind of the same conversation we were just having. Like, what are you really getting there with Florida State and Clemson? If you're going to have to split the pie more ways and the TV value is not there to add those teams. And if you were to truly do the math on a Florida State or a Clemson, like, are they adding more value than Oregon and Washington did to the Big Ten, who had to basically go in there at like 50 cents on the dollar, 40, 50 cents on the dollar, take a pay cut from the rest of the league to get in there? I don't know, man. That's a tough case, I would think, to make. It seems pretty negligible as far as the difference in like prestige and what those programs will be adding. So people naturally run with it like, hey, I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? So of course we'll have this discussion. The pie comment from Greg Sankey. He doesn't want Florida State or Clemson because it would force them maybe to have to cut the pie in more pieces and there wouldn't be as much money to go around. Except that is the complete wrong conversation to be having around all of this, because the SEC does have a pro rata clause. Like, they have a pro rata clause in the TV contract, which means that TV for any new edition would have to pay the same amount that they're paying all the teams right now. That is the pro rata clause. You add somebody else, everybody's money stays the same. TV will kick in the money for that. So this pie conversation it's not the one to be having about Florida State and Clemson. There is still a discussion to be had about, like, is there enough money to actually go around here? But that is, would the TV contracts, or rather the TV networks, in this case ESPN, like, would ESPN want to add Florida State or Clemson to the SEC? Because they know that it would mean they're going to have to pony up the money for that. So would they put the kibosh on this? Would they totally put their foot down and say, like, hey, no, this isn't happening because we don't want to have to pay what's in the pro rata contracts or the pro rata clause of the contract? We don't want to deal with that. Like, that's the conversation to have. And in all of this, I have to say, it's a pretty brilliant diversion tactic, man. It's a pretty brilliant diversion tactic by Greg Sankey here, because he can throw that out and it's a nice soundbite that sounds great, and it continues to just deflect on Florida State, Clemson. He's not doing anything that gets himself legally in trouble. He is creating the conversation around all of this. This news cycle is, man, well, the SEC really doesn't want them, so we'll just move on, much to the chagrin of Florida State fans who know that there could be some other actual tactics and motivations going on and at play here. It gets everybody off the real scent here and sends them kind of distracted after this thing, when the reality is, like, hey, if the SEC and ESPN were really on board with it, they could add somebody and bam, you'd have a full share. It'd be fine. So, to me, the real discussion here is, like, does ESPN want to do it? Is ESPN willing to fork up the money? Do they feel like the money is worth it? And, or I guess, can they work something out where they would be doing something similar to what the Big Ten did with Oregon and Washington, where you can say, hey, I mean, you'll take half a share and you'll like it. And that again goes back to, what is the motivation of Greg Sankey and all of this and how he has handled it publicly lately? Is it all about, hey, I'm just sitting here trying to make these guys feel desperate? Like, I'm going to publicly say we don't want you. You're going to get nothing from me until you come groveling here at our feet, and we'll say, well, you know what? We've got a lot of great football brands, like John already told you. the next thing I was kind of thinking about was more along the lines of basketball and building that up and decoupling our basketball rights to sell them separately, because that was a hell of an idea by Brett Yormark. I'm really thinking about that. We don't really need you. And then Florida State's like, oh, but come on, come on. We want in this league so bad, and we would make your league so much better, and we'll do anything, and we can't be in the ACC, and we've already just staked our reputation on this by getting out. We can't sell to our fans that we're actually going to wind up in the Big 12 or go independent. Like, we need you badly. And then they will say, well, okay, fine. You come in and you'll get $40 million a year, not getting what everybody else is. That very well could be all the setup here. And if it is, that plays perfectly. It's a perfectly played hand by Sankey. It's really the way to say that. Perfectly played hand by Sankey. He's got everybody scrambling around, distracted with comments like this about the pie, which that's the comment that seems to have been the most lasting that I've seen over the last couple of days. The comment about the pie has people talking about the wrong things really here in the convo. People think publicly that we just really hate them now with the way that I've handled this and dropped some quotes in media interviews here. And now we certainly can't have anything that would come back at us in the court of law. And we can sit here and just wait for Florida State and Clemson to grovel, and we can decide if we want to take them on the cheap. It's really what it feels like right now. They will get to make the decision as to whether or not they would want to take them on the cheap. Okay, well, I'm going to start with this one, guys. I see all the super chats. I'm just going to start with this one real quick because I see it's directly related to the conversation for right now, from John Teal. John Teal, wouldn't it be cheaper for ESPN to pay the pro rata for Florida State and Clemson and dump the ACC? Paying the whole ACC must be more spending overall. Yeah, that's certainly a thought, because they have the option to ditch the TV deal after 2027, and that's the option that comes up in February. So that's another date that you'll hear about quite a bit. I will just say, I know I saw Greg Pflugar today saying like he has not really heard anything about ESPN significantly thinking that they would be out on the TV deal. So those who are more informed and connected on this than me don't seem to be speculating too terribly much about that quite yet. But we'll see. It's something to think about with the math and dynamics of all this. Can ESPN kind of mold the landscape the way that they want to? Long have there been conspiracy theories about what's going on there. One of them came from Bob Bowlesby himself, the former commissioner of the Big 12. Like, I know I don't have to tell Big 12 folks here that a lot of people have thought for a long time ESPN may have their hands in some of this, in the way that they are shaping things and directing all of it. So I would not put that past them to be thinking about, what are the dynamics of this that could make this work best for us? Because we know TV has been driving a lot of this for a very long time. A combination of TV and the two richest conferences out there in the SEC and the Big Ten. That has really driven a lot of us. All right, John Teal. Thank you for the support. Let me hop back up here. I know David had a couple. David says the SEC is seeing value in having the SEC name out there, besides during football season, finishing the year strong with brand power in basketball and baseball. Yeah, I mean, we know how much people love to watch the NCAA tournament. That is still one of the most popular sporting events in the world every single time that it comes around, certainly in this country. Don't want to overstate it too much. It's one of the most popular in this country, absolutely. So, yeah, having teams making deep runs like your Bamas of the world, that definitely helps out. Definitely helps out the SEC. And yes, they are very good in baseball too, which, College World Series, dominating the College World Series the way that they did. Obviously, getting a ton of teams there helps as well. So, when people are watching in both of those sports, the SEC has been pretty good in the last year and could be even better with some of those basketball brands. Appreciate you, David. David also says SEC's biggest competition is the Big Ten. The Big Ten is starting to lack in basketball and are dead in baseball. Those are the sports after football. That's an interesting point. Like, if we're parsing through SEC and Big Ten, and look, you would get no pushback on me from anybody saying, hey, the SEC is number one, and it's really not that close, even if the Big Ten technically has a more valuable media rights deal for football and what just came through. Yeah, the SEC is a more complete conference as far as that goes right now. Their basketball is definitely better, and their baseball, it's no contest. Now, a lot of that is I talk about the birth lottery all the time. Like, where were you born? Where do you live? When the South, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to make the baseball thing work. So, yeah, anyway, but it is a good point. It's a good point that the Big Ten lacks a lot of that the SEC brings, and that helps just fuel the whole SEC narrative as a whole, that it is the place to go for college sports, no matter what it is that you are actually really talking about. Our web says pro rata, yes, but Florida and South Carolina have the SEC network with Florida and South Carolina. Yeah, so if we're talking about, you were just mentioning Virginia with the SEC network. Now we're talking about, hey, wouldn't be as valuable with Florida and South Carolina already in tow, and that's a part of the problem for Florida State and Clemson when it comes to the SEC network, if they are worried about more homes really picking it up there. You've already got a presence there. I mean, it's just basically another way to say, right, the idea of like you've already got Florida and South Carolina covered with literally Florida and South Carolina, diminishing returns by adding Florida State and Clemson to the mix there. So appreciate you, R-Web. Thank you as always. Let's see, we already got to John Teal. Okay, we are caught up. We are caught up on the Super Chats. If you guys want to be a part of that, click the $ below the chat box in order to do so. And make sure that you're also liking the video. Totally free way to support the channel. If you're not watching live, John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo is the best way to support the channel. Let's see. Oh, and of course, ofbnews.com. If you want to get subscribed to the Big 12 newsletter, there's a link also in the description of the video. If you want your Big 12 news without Big 10 or SEC slant, that's the way to do it. Make sure you get in there, ofbnews.com. Getting one out there tomorrow with the latest in the anonymous player survey that I took at Big 12 Media Days. And this one is, what coach would you want to play for? If you're not playing for your coach in the Big 12, which Big 12 coach do you want to play for? That's what the anonymous players weigh in on this week. Some more good quotes about that. The last newsletter drop that I had, it was about toughest place to play in the Big 12. So there's a lot of great stuff there going on in the Open for Business newsletter. So according to what we're getting out of SEC Media Days and Ross Dellinger, we actually have now an estimate on how much money is going to go to football players in a revenue-sharing world. Remember, the total that we've known about is $20 to $22 million that would be paid out per school if you're going to hit the max allotted amount allowed for revenue sharing. But the question was, well, how much of that has to go to female student athletes? There's a Title IX issue and a Title IX question with that. Well, according to what's going on in the SEC, they are not expecting that it would have to be a 50-50 split, because the report from Ross Dellinger is basically that most SEC schools, they've earmarked $15 million per year to be going to football. So to read directly from the article, in fact, according to estimates from many of the conference's head football coaches, SEC schools are expected to spend as much as $250 million annually as a league on their football players, or about $15 million per school per year. So when you read that first comment, like $250 million, that definitely seems, to me, I was like, whoa, okay, wait, hang on. I thought we were 20 to 22 million. Then you're like, oh, no, wait, $15 million a year. That's what matters. Here's a quote from Billy Napier, Florida head coach. He said, we're talking $20 million in allotted revenue sharing. In most athletic departments, football is 70 to 75% of the revenue. That's 12.5 to 15 million. That's the number we anticipate. So they're basically just taking it and saying, like, fair is fair. All right. If we are taking in $20 million here for the revenue sharing, we would give the same percentage of that. That is what the athletic department generates from football. So they generate 70 to 75% of the revenue. Those student athletes, they should get 70 to 75% of that money. LSU head coach Brian Kelly told Ross Dellinger between 14 and 17 million. That's what he said his expected football roster budget would be. He was asked, can every school afford such a price tag? And he said, everybody in the SEC, with a smile. Well, clearly you have not talked to Kirby Hocutt. Okay. Let's Tech fans, you know I love you. But send the Cactus Mafia after Brian Kelly here for insinuating that there would be others in lesser conferences out there who could not afford that kind of a price tag for their football roster. All right. Kirby Hocutt said it months ago. Don't you buy Jeremiah Donati? I'm just kidding here. Jeremiah Donati obviously said that as well, but there have been plenty of Big 12 athletic directors who have said as much. If you want to hear, by the way, if you're a BYU fan or you're interested in what BYU's athletic director, Tom Holmoe, said, I asked him that question, and that video was posted yesterday. If you do want to go watch that, it was a little bit different. It was not quite as affirmative, I would say, as what we got out of Jeremiah Donati and Kirby Hocutt. Dellinger also added this line in the story, by the way, at least in the SEC, the majority of the schools plan to earmark 3/4 of those dollars to the sport that generates the most money, which is football. So, I mean, look, I don't think any of that is really, well, one, it's not very surprising that would be their take. Hey, we're not going to worry too much about Title IX being 50-50. We need to make sure that we have this money ready to go for football. That's not the piece that is really going to affect the Big 12 too much one way or the other. I guess maybe you could say, hey, if that's what it's going to be, maybe there's a little bit more of a chance that the NIL collectives are not quite as important for football or men's basketball, or there's a better chance that they say, well, look, I mean, these guys are already getting 15 to 18 million for those sports, for the two main sports. So, like, we don't really need these collectives. Let's work on shutting down the collectives as much as we can. Still seems like an impossible task, but maybe there's a better chance there if you're thinking about the Big 12 view on this, because the best thing would be if that $20 to $22 million is like legit. That's a salary cap. You can't use collectives to fund it past that. That'd be the best thing possible for the Big 12, to be able to be on equal playing field for everybody. But that's also not what the SEC is expecting. This is from Ross Dellinger. Many of the coaches also expect to continue utilizing their booster-led NIL collectives as a, quote, sweetener, one coach says, for their players. Coaches also believe the new football roster limit will be at around 105 players. So that's interesting, 20 more than the current maximum of 85. Quote, I don't know that the collectives go away, Georgia coach Kirby Smart said. They are not under any umbrella that we are under. Nobody is going to be able to say you can't have those. The point of rev share was to take that part out of it, but I don't see it going away. Okay. So Kirby Smart, not anticipating that going away. John Kurtz, not anticipating that going away. But I will reiterate again, the best case scenario for the Big 12 would be if somehow it does, and you just hit that revenue sharing number, and that's it. That's all. That's what you can do. Don't see any way that happens, because the people with the power, which are those in the SEC right now, this is what they're saying. They've got the biggest, the most amount of power to yield. We'll put it that way. Got the most amount of power to yield in this situation. If you're wondering how men's basketball splits into this, according to past interviews with plaintiff attorneys, they expect to distribute about 90% of the $2.77 billion to power conference football and men's basketball players. That's a 90-10 split for men. So instead of the 50-50 that some have wondered or perhaps prognosticated might come because of Title IX with the revenue sharing, sounds like the SEC is planning on 90-10. They are planning on 90-10. So that's just an update there. I think it is something to keep your eye on for Big 12 fans. We'll just put it that way. My hopes are not high that that's going to create a better scenario necessarily for the Big 12, but it's something you have to continue to monitor. And whatever is being said by the SEC and Big 10, but particularly the SEC, I'm going to listen up on that. All right, let's hop back in here to the super chats. Let's see. We got John Teal, so we are on to David. What's going on, David? David says, I think ESPN needs to be careful. They snag ACC big names, and ACC might sue ESPN for stealing teams, kind of like the Big 12 claimed against ESPN in Oklahoma and Texas. Yeah, I guess it would depend on like what proof they might have if ESPN were really diabolically trying to maneuver the pieces on the chessboard there, because Bob Bowlesby sure seemed for a second like he thought he had something on him that wound up not really seemingly going much of anywhere, but he came out with the tortious interference claims and he was ready to go, man. He was locked and loaded, certainly insinuating that he had a lot of proof there. The ACC is going to be fighting much the same way. I mean, that Bob Bowlesby was a wounded animal in the same way that the ACC is likely to be here. You could argue certainly that they already are now. But in this, if they were to lose, Florida State and Clemson would be even further wounded. So they may well do it. They may well do it if they think they found something. And look, if you're them, I mean, I don't know. Florida State's been digging up stuff on John Swafford and saying that, that there was nepotism that happened to lead everybody down the road to where they're at right now. They've been basically, point being, getting down and dirty. So why would you not get down and dirty if you're the ACC here? Alan, what's up, Alan? Appreciate you, Alan. Thank you for popping by and for your support of the channel as always. Alan says, John, Clemson is okay, but I'd rather have North Carolina or Virginia in the Big 12 than disruptive Florida State. The football basketball experience in Chapel Hill and Charlottesville is better cultural fit in the Big 12 than with the SEC. Rock Chalk Jayhawk, Alan. Well, Alan, I appreciate you as always. I think there are a lot of people who would share your opinion on Florida State for sure. I think there are a lot of people like within the walls of the Big 12 that I guess if they didn't outright share it, they would at least be raising those concerns and wanting to have that properly vetted before ever extending any kind of offer to Florida State. At the end of the day, I mean, the hard sell on that might just be, hey, this is going to make you more money. It will make the league more relevant. It will be so much better for you personally, long term, if you can suck it up and deal with their whole aura and whatever they are. I'm not going to write it off like it is not a concern. It would be a concern. And there is a part you can feel that the conference, yes, they've lost the brand power of Texas, but there is almost like a little bit of an exhale. Like, man, at least everybody's pretty much on equal playing field now. Like, we don't have to worry about a lot of that anymore. So that there's something to that for sure. Unfortunately, I mean, look, I would love to have North Carolina in the Big 12 for sure too. Virginia, fine, whatever. I can't get excited about Virginia sports. And I know Virginia basketball has obviously had some really high highs, but it's just such a boring brand. And then, Virginia football, man, just not very relevant. Just not very relevant. And nothing against the Cavaliers. I'm not trying to come after them, but just feels like it has been such an irrelevant football program for a very long time. It's hard for me to get too fired up and excited about it. But because of that interest from the SEC, there's really no scenario I don't think where any of that would play out, where either of those would become involved with the Big 12, because they're higher up the hierarchy, the food chain, whatever you want to call it, in the conference realignment world. But Alan, appreciate it. We know Alan has been steadfast in not wanting Kansas to go to the SEC. And Alan says he would be okay with Clemson, be worried about Florida State. I would just point out with Clemson too, they have not been as obviously outwardly demonstrative as Florida State in all of this, trying to get out. But I mean, they did wind up filing a lawsuit against the conference. So they have kind of by definition still been fairly disruptive as well. But yes, Alan, I understand why you'd be more concerned about Florida State than Clemson. So appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for your support of the channel as always, and for dropping by tonight. Okay, you want to talk a little Nick Saban? Let's talk a little Nick Saban. There's some good and some bad here that I want to report to you from Nick Saban, who is now ESPN analyst Nick Saban, not the Alabama football coach, former Alabama head football coach. Let's start with the bad news here. Okay, we'll get you the bad news first. Here's the bad news, and that is that Nick Saban was doing some whining about the Big 12. I'm going to call it whining. I have not, in fairness, I have not heard the specific quote. I have not heard him say it. And a lot of times, if you just see it in the characters on Twitter, it can be a little misleading, because you have not heard the question. You've not heard the full context of everything. You haven't heard tone of voice. All of those things can definitely matter. But let's get to the topic at hand here, which is just what he said about the Big 12 through TCU and, I suppose, K-State. So Nick Saban made a comment at SEC Media Days on the 2022 playoff. Quote, "I still have a little pet peeve about we didn't get in and TCU did. And Kansas State beat them, and we beat Kansas State by 25 or 30 points in the bowl game. Who had the better team?" Okay, Nick, well, there are a lot of ways that I would go with this. One, a bit surprised that a guy that's had as much success as you is still lamenting that. But hey, Alabama did lose to Michigan in the college football playoff this past year. Who was the last team to beat Michigan? Oh, it was that TCU team that he's talking about right there. They were the last team to actually beat the Wolverines, which you would think would speak to how good TCU actually is as a squad, but I digress. And Nick Saban as a coach, I'm sure, you remember the losses more than the wins. Guys that are wired like that probably do. But still, I'm like, how is this? There was probably a question that pushed it somewhat there. I will acknowledge that. But I'm like, what are we doing still talking about this 2 years later when you're retired now? Like, feels like there's a lot of other things to be really worried about here, Saban. But a lot of TCU fans jumped all over this, and I thought did a great job bringing up the fact that, like our friend Horned Up Frog, okay, to quote Archer, phrasing, Horned Up Frog, I still have a little pet peeve about the 2014 college football playoff. We got left out, and Bama got in, and Ole Miss beat them, and we beat Ole Miss by 39 points in the bowl game, and Alabama lost to Ohio State in the playoff. Who had the better team? That's pretty good. That's well done from Horned Up Frog. He did it in the exact same wording and cadence of what Nick Saban did, but said, look, in 2014, buddy, you got in. TCU, we got left on the outside looking in. We clobbered Ole Miss in a bowl game, beat them by 39 points. You guys lost to them in the regular season. Not only that, you didn't even win a game in the playoff. We at least won a game in the playoff. So why don't we talk about 2014? And I imagine we did not get a Nick Saban quote about 2014 there. So to me, this part of it was sort of like this is like the whiny level of the SEC where they're a child that's not getting their way like they virtually always have. And this is not like a rage against the SEC, rail against the SEC and what they are segment. The SEC is unequivocally the best football conference out there. There's no doubt about that. You are a supreme hater if you would really argue that. It is true. It is the best. It is definitely the best. But that does not mean that you get the benefit of the doubt in literally every single scenario. That does not mean that results of games don't matter. Nick Saban, do not lose 2 games. You'd be in the college football playoff. TCU went undefeated in the regular season. They lost a very close game in the Big 12 championship game to a team that they had, by the way, already beaten. They went to the playoff, and they very much justify that they belonged by beating Michigan, a team that would go on to still not lose a game since then, including winning a national championship and beating Alabama on the way to do so. So to me, well, the SEC is great. You don't always deserve the benefit of the doubt in situations like this. And Bama, you've gotten the benefit of the doubt plenty of times. Plenty of times. How about 2011? Let's bring another Big 12 example home here. 2011. What happened in 2011? Alabama got in by the hair on their chin. They got in that national championship game rematch against LSU, which was, it's like, why did we all have to watch that again? That was the year they played 9-6 in the regular season. And yet Oklahoma State got left on the outside looking in. They got the benefit of the doubt there based on how the system was set up after Oklahoma State's heartbreaking loss to Iowa State. It was just like percentage points in the BCS. You got the benefit of the doubt. As it was mentioned already, 2014, you got the benefit of the doubt. So it didn't quite work out one time when the Big 12 had an unbeaten team in the regular season. Like, chill out, man. Chill out. You got a lot of trophies on the wall. You've got pelts up everywhere. Just enjoy those. Let's not be complaining about 2022 here anymore. And by the way, it was a great team. That 2022 team was a great team. And one of my thoughts there was like, I think I saw that. Was it Manhattan Hell? One of the K-State Twitter accounts out there that is pretty good. I feel like put this out there. They're just like, geez, like K-State having to deal with motivated Alabama, that Alabama team and motivated Will Anderson, Bryce Young and company actually being motivated in a bowl game. One of the worst draws that you could possibly have there because Alabama did have somewhat of a chip on their shoulder after what had happened with all that. I mean, I digress. Look, they were clearly a much better team, but getting them at full strength and motivated there, that was tough. That was tough. So, yeah, I guess I forgot I had an analogy for this one. Nick Saban in this scenario. It's the dog that always gets a treat when he sits, right? I mean, the dog sits, gets a treat one day, goes up to someone, sits, They don't have a treat for him. He's going to start barking, being like, wait, what the hell is this? I'm used to getting a treat. That's what I do. Like, we're the SEC. We exist. We get a treat. That's how it works. We exist. A treat is handed to us. This time, a treat was not. So we're going to bark. That's what we're going to do. Having said all of this, I do possibly regret to inform you. I guess it depends on how you really feel here. But Nick Saban did have a good take, too. Nick Saban had a good take. And this came from the Ross Dellinger article that we were just talking about. Nick Saban has a good take about the future of the sport. So it says, this is Dellinger, no matter the outcome of this new revenue sharing model, the structure's primary goal should be to incentivize parity, said Nick Saban, the former Alabama coach who now works as an analyst for ESPN. The NIL era, Saban contends, has created a lack of parity within the sport. The industry is on the way to a system of haves and have-nots. Saban, that's good. We were just talking about this like, hey, I don't think this is really going to bring the Big 12 closer, bring everybody closer. Saban is saying we should bring everybody closer. Get us a salary cap, incentivize parity. I heard Josh Pate the other day advocating for Nick Saban as a potential commissioner of college football. If these are the ideas that Saban is going to roll out there and say it really should be all about parity, I might be able to get behind endorsing Nick Saban as commissioner of college football. I would have thought beforehand he would just bow down to all his old buddies in the SEC, but maybe not. Maybe not. So look, Nick Saban does not appear to be all bad. I like that. Seems like he does, at least in some way, have the good of the overall sport in mind. He says, quote, I think players should be compensated, but I think they should be compensated in a way that this player is compensated under the same set of circumstances as that player is compensated that you're playing against. That's not the case now. A lot of people would come back and argue that's never really been the case, Nick. We've always had not direct revenue sharing payment to athlete disparities, but we've always had facility disparities, just money disparities all across the board. That's kind of what the sport is built on. That's a part of the beauty of the sport. And there is definitely truth to that. But there is also truth to this thing has kind of skewed out of proportion now, where you've got two leagues so much further ahead in terms of their revenue that it's creating more of a gap than we really have ever had in the sport. So Nick Saban clearly sees that and thinks, hey, we need to do something to try and change this a little bit. So I can get on board with that, Nick. I can get on board with that. You let me know if I need to buy a campaign t-shirt? I'm not sure how exactly this would work, but if I do need to buy a campaign t-shirt, you just let me know. You just let me know. I think we are all caught up on the we're all caught up on the chats. We're all caught up on the super chats. If you have anything, this is definitely buzzer beater time. Definitely buzzer beater time. I may save the take on the Big 12 race, although hell, that probably won't get in this week because we've got Big 10 media days. We've got ACC media days, perhaps more importantly, coming up this week. So I would imagine that we are going to get a lot of content. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I probably need to drop something about ACC media days in Open for Business there, because as it relates to Florida State and Clemson and all the speculation about the Big 12 and everywhere else, I am very intrigued to see what Jim Phillips' response will be and just what will come out of ACC media days. We got all those different stories. Ross Dellinger's first piece that he wrote for Yahoo, the Ross Dellinger interview with me, where he talked about, hey, I think Florida State and Clemson have probably had talks. We got all that stuff coming out of Big 12 media days. Brett McMurphy's story dropping at SEC media days. What are we going to get at ACC media days? Probably something interesting. I would imagine. David, what's up, David? David, playing fair from an SEC coach is hilarious. He only means it because he is retired. I mean, probably, but I feel like that does put him in more of a position to actually advocate for it, right? Because, like you said, like he's not in the league that would be benefiting from it anymore. It's not directly tied to his success or whatever. So now he could take more of a step back. Now, look, would I be very much worried that this is like typical politician, right? Campaign trail promise that doesn't actually come to fruition when they win, when they get into office? Yes. So to your point there, David, yes, somebody would need to really keep tabs on Saban to make sure that it happened. But I wouldn't have thought he would even say that because of the risk of, taking flack and pushback from his own former colleagues, like the Big Ten coaches, or rather the SEC coaches that he is talking about here that would be potentially benefiting from this. So, maybe David, we should cut him a little bit of slack and say maybe there is more reason to believe he would do it because he is retired now and it wouldn't quite affect him. We'll see. But your skepticism, you have come by it honestly, and it is definitely warranted. It's definitely warranted. Daniel, what's up, Daniel? Appreciate you, Daniel. Thank you for being here, and thank you for always supporting the channel, my friend. I appreciate you a ton. Daniel says, I agree with Saban on parity. Dynasties are good to a point. If one team or conference wins all the time, the rest of the college world will not care. Great show. Go Royals, go Cats. Appreciate you, Daniel. Thank you. Yeah, you hit on bigger picture issue here that I think a lot of people potentially foresee long term, where if we get to a super league, if we are really going to like only the Big Ten or the SEC have a chance to win this, and beyond that, it's really only 7 or 8 teams have a legitimate chance to win this every single year, you might start to lose some interest there. I think the thing that makes it a little bit different in college football is that so much of what makes the sport great and the fabric of the sport is stuff that in no way involves the playoff. It is the rivalries. It is the weird stuff that happens, like a Florida player throwing a shoe and it winds up costing them a game. It's Elijah Moore peeing in the end zone after scoring in the Egg Bowl, and it winds up costing them a game. There's so much that's great about the sport that still keeps people tuned in outside of just the playoff. But it's not going to be just the playoff where the disparity shows up. If it's like you've got so much more revenue in the SEC and the Big Ten that nobody can keep players in the Big 12 or whatever is left of the ACC, and that will start to drive interest lower from those folks, and definitely make the point that you are making there for that. But yes, people will argue against dynasties a lot, and the typical pushback that you'll hear is like, no, those have actually been great. Like when you have the Patriots, if you have the Lakers, Celtics, whatever from back in the day, people do tune in to watch that. They want to watch it, even if they're like hate watching or wanting to see them lose. Like a lot of people will watch that. So there's something to that. But yeah, eventually you could start to have some problems, and it is a bit of a fine line there in some ways. Appreciate you, Daniel. Thank you for your support of the channel. As always, great to see you here. Cyclone Steve, what's up? Cyclone Steve says, I'm told no one in the ACC goes to the Big 12 ever. Comeback. Are you asking for a comeback, Cyclone Steve? You need a comeback for the ACC? The comeback is just start screenshotting every single Pac-12 fan that said that last year. You'd have to go back and review your Twitter timeline from basically a year ago, because we were getting really close, right? That was like the first week of August, I think, that everything went down last year. You just go show them what happened. The Pac-12, they said all the same things. Utah fans said all the same things. And I just went to Vegas. I saw Utah there. I saw Cam Rising. I saw Kyle Whittingham. Saw Mark Harlan, their AD. Like they were all there. They're in the conference. That's what happens. That's what happens, Cyclone Steve. So just let them know that they're next on the list. They're next on the list. Appreciate you, Cyclone Steve. Thank you for being here. Thank you to everybody for your contribution tonight, whether you're just viewing, whether you are able to contribute. I appreciate all of you so very much. Thank you for your support of the channel. Keep supporting the newsletter, ofbnews.com. Open for Business is the newsletter, the Big 12 newsletter. I will have one coming out tomorrow for those of you guys that sign up. So make sure that you do that right now. Click the link in the description of the video or go to ofbnews.com and spread the word on that as much as you can to your Big 12 fan friends, different Facebook groups, wherever it is that you are on the internet. Spread the word about this channel. Spread the word about the newsletter, ofbnews.com. Any of that is great and helps me continue to grow what it is that I'm doing here. And I so appreciate all of you guys that do that. So anyway, thank you all. Have a great start to your week. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday nights, and I will talk to you all very soon.